Good afternoon to 100% here. On behalf of Commemoration National Institute, I welcome you all for this today's function. We are very proud to announce that today's event is being conducted as part of the Department of Atomic Energy celebrations of Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav, the celebration and commemoration of the fruit of freedom on 75th year of independence. Today is a very important and memorable day in the history of HBNI. We are going to have Triveni Sangamam here. Triveni Sangamam is the confluence of the holy rivers, the Ganga, Yamuna, and the mythical Saraswati River. And this confluence is referred as Prayag. Not only this, wherever three rivers join and convergence take place, that is named as Triveni Sangamam in India. So we have one in Gujarat, one in West Bengal, and one in Tamil Nadu also. This day, the 5th August 2022, is a Triveni Sangamam day for HBNI and a very important day in the history of Commemoration National Institute. Three holistic events are merged together to make it today more enjoyable and valuable. First of its kind, Ma Saraswati is considered to exist in the metaphysical form and is responsible for all our inner talents and knowledge. As part of Azadi Amrut Mahotsav, HBNI has conducted poster and essay competitions for various levels of students, including students and college and university students across all over India. And today, the results of these competitions are going to be announced. Second, like Ganga, the release of the book Atomic Energy in India, Achievements Since Independence, written by two great scholars, Dr. A.K. Tyagi, Director Chemistry Group BRC, and Professor P.R. Vasudeva Rao, Honorable Vice Chancellor of HBNI and former Director of IGCOR. This book is the right choice and reviews the achievements of India in atomic energy related technology since independence, which is a befitting event for celebration of independence. Not only a celebration, but also a guideline for further progress of India in this era. Third, the Yamuna. This date, the 5th August 2022, is also an important day for the development of biosciences in our country. The great Indian achiever, Sir G.N. Ramachandran's centenary falls on this day, who has remarkable recognition globally in bringing G.N. Ramachandran plot, who discovered the triple structure of collagen and provides a way to view the distribution of torsion angles in a protein structure. Hence, we are going to have all the three events here in Anushakti Nagar. So on behalf of HBNI, once again, I welcome you all for this Triveni Sangamam of HBNI. May I now request Professor Anil Kakotkar, Chancellor HBNI, Professor Padmanabhan Balaraman, former Director IISc Bengaluru, Professor P.R. Vasudeva Rao, Honorable Vice Chancellor HBNI, Professor P.D. Nayak, Dean HBNI, Professor A.K. Tyagi, Director Chemistry Group, to occupy their seats in the dais. Thank you, sir. May I now invite Professor P.D. Nayak, Dean HBNI, to propose the formal welcome address. Professor P.D. Nayak, please.
Good afternoon. In fact, our registrar had already given the welcome address. I have just to extend it. Okay. I should thank everybody who joined today, either physically here or online mode. This program is organized by HBNI as a part of Day celebrates Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav. And as Resha told, it is also birth centenary year of Professor G.N. Ramachandran and I, P.D. Naik, on behalf of Omi Baba National Institute and my own behalf, welcome you all for this function. As you might have seen that many dignitaries and participants have joined online for these functions. Many of them are on WebEx and many are on YouTube platform. I welcome them all for these functions. Professor Padmanabhan Balaram, DST YOS Care Professor, National Center for Biological Sciences, popularly known as NCBS, Bengaluru, and former Director, IISc, Bengaluru. Thank you, sir, for accepting our invitation to be chief guest of today's function. Dr. Anil Kakodkar, Chancellor, HBNI, and Chairman, Rajiv Gandhi Science and Technology Commission, and former Chairman, AEC. Professor P.R. Vasudev Rao, VC HBNI, Professor A.K. Tyagi, Director, Chemistry Group, BARC, Dr. P.C. Selvin, Registrar HBNI on the dais, Professor R.B. Grover, Professor Emeritus, HBNI and Founder Director, HBNI, Professor J.B. Joshi, Professor Emeritus, HBNI, Professor A.P. Tiwari, Professor Ganti, Professor Maiti, Professor Tomar, Professor Datta Saab, Professor Ghosh, Professor Dureja, and many others. I welcome you all. I can see there are many dignitaries on online mode. Professor Yakmi, Professor Gautam Bhattacharya from SINP, and many others. I extend a warm welcome to all of them. I welcome members of Council of Management, members of Planning and Monitoring Board, members of Academic Council, members of Board of Studies, Dean Academics of various institutes of HBNI, faculty members, staff of HBNI Center Office, and other DE units and students. Today we missed the presence of our beloved Chairman, Council of Management, Sri K.N. Vyas, due to his engagement with other important officer commitments. He was not able to join us. These programs is highly supported by his generous supports, and he also supporting all the HBNI activities. In his absence, I'll thank him on behalf of HBNI staff and functionaries. As Registrar mentioned, Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav is an initiative of the Government of India to celebrate and commemorate 75 years of progressive India and glorious history of its people, culture, and achievements. In the past, HBNI has arranged webinars by eminent academicians, scientists, technologists, essay and poster competitions under DE celebrates Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. This year, 2022, as Registrar mentioned, and is also celebrated as the birth centenary year of Professor G.N. Ramchandran, one of the greatest scientists of India and known for his discoveries of triple helical structures of collagen and Ramchandran plot. To celebrate both the events, HBNI has arranged this program in hybrid mode. I should thank Professor Barram for accepting our invitation to deliver a talk in memory of Professor G.N. Ramchandran under the title G.N. Ramchandran and Birth of Molecular Biophysics and Structural Biology in India. Thank you, sir, for considering our request and gracing the occasion. Thank you all physically present here as well as those who are online. And I once again welcome you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Naik. May now request Professor P.R. Vasudeva Rao, Honorable Vice Chancellor HBNI, for presenting his introductory remarks.
Professor Balram, Chief Guest for today's function, Dr. Anil Kakodkar, Chancellor HBNI, Professor Grover, Professor Joshi, Professor Naik, Professor Tyagi, Professor Ghanti, Tiwari, and other colleagues from here, as well as colleagues from CIs and OCC and other organizations and other participants who have joined online. I want to make my remarks very brief because I am also waiting very eagerly to listen to Professor Balram along with you. Just I want to make a few general points. First is, of course, this is the last of the series of special webinars which we have been organizing throughout the year as part of the celebration of Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav. We are indeed privileged to have amidst us today Professor Balram as the speaker, and I join you all in welcoming him. India has produced several pioneers in the domain of science and technology who have made everlasting contributions of high value. And it has been our privilege over the year to hear from some of them during the year-long celebration and hear about some of them during these celebrations. Our speakers in this lecture series included Dr. R. Chidambaram, Dr. Anil Kakodkar, and Dr. V.S. Ramamurthy. And today, we'll be hearing about Dr. G.N. Ramachandran, one among the science pioneers of India. Though I am not a specialist in biophysics, I had some interest in science history, so I did some reading about Professor Ramachandran, and I found that in his biography, titled A Biography of the Famous Indian Biophysicist by Raghupati Sharma, published in 1998, I found a very interesting statement. Ramachandran belongs in the same league as some of the most famous Indian scientists of the century. For example, Sir C.V. Raman, M.N. Saha, and S.N. Bose. And it goes on to say, clearly his contributions in the field of biophysics are of Nobel Prize caliber. Coming back home, we know that in his letter to Sir Dorabji Tata Trust, written in 1944, Dr. Homi Bhabha emphatically said, and I quote, "In the last 2 years, I have come more and more to the view that provided proper appreciation and financial support are forthcoming, it is one's duty to stay in one's own country and build up schools of excellence comparable with those that other countries are fortunate in possessing." I think it's very significant to note that Ramachandran had the same spirit of nationalism in him. He had many lucrative offers and assignments for performing research in the advanced Western countries, but like his mentor C.V. Raman, he also decided to work in India against all odds. We look forward to hearing more about Dr. Ramachandran today from Professor Balram. An event like 75 years of independence should not be just like a celebration, but should also have an element that leaves a lasting result that will keep reminding us about what we were celebrating during this period. It was this thought that prompted us to take up the publication of a book describing the achievements of the country in the domain of nuclear science and technology. And it's very appropriate that the book gets released today at the hands of our Chancellor, Dr. Kakodkar, who himself had initiated, mentored, and nurtured several of the activities that led to the achievements described in this book. I also want to record my sincere thanks to Professor A.K. Tyagi of BRC for his drive and commitment that made it possible to release the book today. Our thanks are also to the authors for their patience in handling our editorial requirements and carrying out several rounds of revisions. I want to end my remarks by mentioning my outlook on HBNI. HBNI is a young university in its teens now. This year, in the NIRF ranking, HBNI was placed at the 11th position among the Indian research institutions, which is indeed something to feel proud of. And I am confident that when we celebrate the centenary of India's independence in 2047, HBNI will be counted as one among the best achievers in the country or across the world with regard to generating intellectual property and human resources towards enhancing the capabilities of our country in meeting its developmental goals. With these few remarks, I would like to continue the program. I will request Dr. Selvin, please announce the next step. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rao, for your product remarks. Due to some official unavoidable work, our chairman, Sri K.N. Vyas, Secretary DAE, could not take part in our program today. However, he has sent his wishes for the success of today's event. So the next part of the event is the announcement of awards for the poster and essay competition. May I now request Dr. Anshu Singhal, Assistant Dean HBNI, the coordinator of the event, to present the overview of the competition and the results. So Dr. Anshu Singhal, please.
Thank you, Dr. Selvin. Good afternoon, everybody, and a warm welcome to all the dignitaries present here and online, the seniors, evaluation committee members and participants who are present here and online. I extend a warm welcome to all of them for this function. It is my pleasure to be announcing the names of poster and essay competition winners in this esteemed gathering. Homi Bhabha National Institute organized 2 competitions as part of DAE Celebrates Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav. The poster competition was organized in the month of December 2021 for HBNI students across all constituent institutions and OCC Wolf Campus Center of HBNI. The topics given for the poster competitions included India's achievement in science and technology, atoms in the service of nation, and reducing our carbon footprint. 10 valid entries were received from different CIs of HBNI, and a poster evaluation committee constituted by Registrar HBNI, which consisted of experts from BRC and Atomic Energy Central Schools in Anushakti Nagar, evaluated the posters. The results, the first prize was won by Shri Krishna Kumar Yadav, a PhD engineering science student from IT Car, for his poster, Atoms in the Service of Nation. The second prize winner is Ms. Sonal Kadam, a PhD doctoral student in physical sciences from BARC. Again, for this topic is Atoms in the Service of Nation. The third prize winner is Ms. Nikita Rajput, a doctoral student from RRCAT, and she won the award for her posters titled India's Achievement in Science and Technology. Congratulations to all the winners. The winners will be receiving cash prize and a certificate of award. Another event which was organized by HBNI, another competition which was organized by HBNI as part of Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav was essay competitions, which was organized at national level in two categories. Category 1 for school students and category 2 for undergraduate and postgraduate students from educational institutes all over India. We got a tremendous response for this activity. In category 1, total valid entries received were 24, and the topics which were given for essay competitions are very, very relevant to the present time. So, for example, COVID night learning at home during lockdown, effective methods of preserving natural resources, ancient Indian concepts of planets and space, and vision for a new and self-reliant India. These were the topics given for category 1, and the slide gives the breakup of entries received per topic. In category 2, we received a total 154 entries, and again, the breakup of the entries is given in the slide. The evaluation process for evaluating the essays was very thorough and multi-stage. First of all, they were checked for similarity index or plagiarism, and SIRD, BRC helped us in this regard. After the essays were checked, a preliminary evaluation committee constituted for each category. They evaluated the essays and shortlisted the top essays. Top 5 essays were shortlisted in first category 1, and for category 2, because we had 7 topics, so 3 top entries for each topic were shortlisted. They were further evaluated by Sri Abhay Mokashi, a renowned and veteran journalist, and final winners were selected by evaluation committee members in consultation with Sri Abhay Mokashi. The evaluation criteria on which the evaluation was done included the content, that is relevance to the theme, comprehensiveness, originality, insights, organization, how the essays were organized, clarity of thoughts, creativity and consistency, and then mechanics, including punctuation, spelling, capitalization, and grammar. Now, coming to the results, in category 1, that is for school students, the first prize winner is Mr. Sambha Malu from Colorex Olive International School, Ahmedabad. He has won the award for his essay on the topic, The Ancient Indian Concepts of Planets and Space. Second prize winner is Ms. Farah Diba from Senior Secondary School Girls, AMU, for her essay, COVID-19 Learning at Home During Lockdown. The third prize is shared by Ms. Ruheen and Mr. Jai Bharat Tijani. Ms. Ruheen won the award for her essay on effective methods of preserving natural resources, and Mr. Tijani won for his essay on the topic Vision for a New and Self-Reliant India. Congratulations to all the winners. Now, coming to the results in category 2, the first prize winner is Ms. Suhana Hussain, an undergraduate student from University of Allahabad. She won the award for her essay, Importance of Nuclear Energy in Carbon-Free World. The second prize winner is Ms. Vigya Sharma. She is a postgraduate student from Guru Nanak Dev University, Amritsar, and she won the award for her essay titled Einsteinian Photoelectric Effect. At third position, again, there is a tie. It is won by Mr. Aditya Krishnan, a BTech student from Kerala, for his essay on the topic Importance of Nuclear Energy in Carbon-Free World. And Mr. Pawan Gupta, who is a physiotherapy student from Mumbai, for his essay on the topic Virologists Are Today's Universal Necessities. Congratulations to winners, and they will be receiving a cash prize as well as a certificate of award. Now, I would like to conclude by thanking everyone who helped in making these competitions a great success. First of all, I thank VC, Dean, Registrar, HBNI for their support and guidance at every stage of the competition. Then thanks goes to all the participants of poster and essay competition for their enthusiastic participation, and to the judges of these competitions For posters, Shri Gharat, Shri Raghunath Bidwa, Srimati Vidya, and Srimati Dolakar Bidwa, they are teachers from Atomic Energy Central Schools. And for essay evaluation committee, the list is very long. Sri Mukhashi, of course, renowned journalist. All the associate deans, which are current and former deans of HBNI, which were member of evaluation committee for category 1 and category 2. Then Professor V.K. Datta, Professor Tomar, Professor Paul, Professor Ghosh, Professor Nayak, Professor Dureja, and some ex-BRT scientists were also involved in the evaluation, Dr. B. Venkatramani. I'd like to thank head SIRD for checking the similarity index, the essays, and teachers from Atomic Energy Junior College as well as central schools, Shri Khular, Srimati Hima Malini, Shri Chakma, Srimati Asha Sharma, Srimati Ankita Patel, Shri VP Wagis, and Shri Joseph. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. We are now moving to the second event of the celebration, the releasing of the book. We now request Dr. A.K. Tyagi, Director, Chemistry Group, BRC, for briefing about the book as one of the author of the book. Dr. A.K. Tyagi, please.
Respected Professor P. Balram, Chief Guest of the function, respected Dr. Anil Kakodkar, Chancellor SBNI and former Chairman AEC and Secretary DAE, Professor P.R.B. Rao, Honorable Vice Chancellor SBNI, Professor P.D. Nayak, Dean SBNI, Professor J.B. Joshi, Professor R.B. Grover, and I see a number of my friends, Dr. Selvin, Registrar HBNI, delegates online and offline. A very good afternoon to you all. I must admit that it's a proud moment for me to give briefing about this book. In august presence of likes of Dr. Kakodkar, Professor Balram, and Professor Joshi, Professor Grover, and many others who are online with us. As India celebrates her 75th independence, DAE also is almost close to this age, close to 70, 75 years or so. So what could have been the befitting tribute to this great organization, which was initiated by a great son of India, Dr. Homi Jahangir Bhabha. So myself and Honorable VC sir, we were having a series of deliberations. What could be the theme of this book? After several rounds of deliberations, we both felt a book on atomic energy in India, achievements since independence, would be a befitting tribute to rich traditions of this great organization. Today, it is an immense pleasure for all of us that book is being released by another great son of India, Dr. Anil Kakodkar, who was with DAE for almost more than 50 years. Today's soft copy is going to be released because for some reasons beyond our control, ISBN number did not arrive on time. So that's why there's a delay in getting printed versions. We'll do that within next 2 weeks or so. Book comprises of 20 chapters. First 2 chapters are on the life and work of Dr. Homi Jahangir Bhabha and Dr. Vikram Sarabhai, respectively. Then subsequent chapters start with cradle of DAE, that is uranium mining, milling, and exploration. Followed by atomic minerals, heavy water, how from single drop DAE became an organization of largest producer of heavy water. This remarkable journey of growth of production of heavy water is compiled in one chapter. Nuclear physics research initiated almost 6 to 7 decades ago, how it led to the design of research reactors. Apsara, many of you may know that Apsara is the first nuclear reactor not only in India, but in Asia. So all those foundations, how nuclear physics research calculations were used to design various aspects of the reactor. There are chapters on research reactor. Research reactor are the foundation of designing power reactors. So next chapter is on power reactors. How rich experience gained in research reactors lead to expertise in design of power reactors, right from 220 megawatt to 540, 700. Now we talk about IPWRs, etc. Everything is covered in this chapter. Fuel fabrication, there are two chapters. One of them is on fuel fabrication for research reactors. We have several in Trombay. Second chapter is on fuel fabrication for power reactors. This comes from NFC colleagues. We have rich traditions of nuclear waste management. We recover lots of valuable from nuclear waste. So there is a dedicated chapter how this program was initiated in early 1960s and how it led to the present state-of-the-art facilities which DAE can boast of. We recover radioisotopes and how they are used in sectors of health, agriculture, industry. There are 4 chapters on these aspects. There is one chapter on how various materials which are used in reactors are designed from scratch level, right from mineral, how you separate zirconium, and then how you make zircaloy and zirc niobium based structural materials. This chapter is dedicated to these efforts of DAE in last 40 years or so. There are chapters on advanced technologies such as accelerators, laser, and fusion. So you will agree with me that this is one book where all the aspects of DAE are covered in single source. There's a major advantage. All these chapters are there some way or the other, but perhaps to best of my knowledge at least, this is the only book where entire gamut of DAE will be found in one single book. Chapters are written by highly experienced people who have spent 4 to 5 decades in DAE. We have ensured, myself and VC sir, the language is simple, chapters are not too technical. Some chapters were quite technical. We reverted back to authors, not once, twice, but 3 or 4 times to make it less technical. And he already has thanked. I also take this opportunity to thank all the authors for bearing with our, I would say, never-ending requirements, but so kind of them. Director BARC, Dr. Mohanty, Chairman AAC, Shri K.N. Vyas, both of them showed keen interest in progress of this book. I would like to thank on my own behalf and on behalf of VC sir to both of them for kindly sparing time to time, providing us guidance. Thanks to all the authors and SIRD colleagues for timely completion of soft copy, and printed version also is almost around the corner. 2 words we hear these days. One is circular economy, where nothing is waste. Everything has some useful component. Other word is cradle to grave approach. These 2 buzzwords are very common these days. But anybody who will browse through this book would be fully convinced that all these things Dr. Homi Jagir Bhabha conceived 7 decades ago. What world is teaching today, we practiced almost 6 to 7 decades ago. At last, I would like to thank Professor P.R. Vasudeva Rao for kindly selecting me as a co-editor out of 1,000 plus faculty members who were phone call away to VC sir. I'm sure this book will make the desired impact for which it was intended. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Tyagi. May I now request Dr. Tyagi to hand over the CD of the book to Professor Anil Kakodkar. May I now request Professor Anil Kakodkar, Chancellor HPNI, to release the CD of the book and hand over the first CD to Professor Balram. We now request Dr. Anil Kakodkar, Chancellor HBNI, to present his special address. Sir, please.
Professor Balaram, Professor Vasudevara, colleagues on the dais, off the dais, and online. Several of them are online. First of all, let me thank Dr. Vasudevara to have conceived this implementation of Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav, which is an activity is going on throughout the country, throughout all institutions, a lot of festivities around. But within that, conceive it in a manner which would be productive from the perspective of HBNI, from the perspective of the programs of atomic energy, institutions, the constituent institutions of HBNI. I would also like to compliment both Professor Vasudev Rao and Professor Tyagi for putting in efforts to put together this book. And I think that would be a sort of, I wouldn't say record of what has happened in Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav, but certainly a good document in the context of Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav. And that's what now I intend talking about, let's say, as a part of Amrut Mahotsav, we looked at, or were, the aim was to look at the past 75 years since independence. I think it will be equally appropriate to look at, if not next 75 years, at least next 25 years, particularly in the context of HBNI. But before I do that, it struck me, and it's no criticism, so don't take it otherwise. But of the three topics that were proposed for poster competition, the third topic, which was, I forget the words, but which was towards the net zero, and at least the three winning entries, that didn't figure. I don't know how many entries were there on that theme, but I think in today's context, particularly for atomic energy, that is actually the most important theme. And I would like to see a poster, of course, a good poster, which is worthy of winning the awards, but there. And I was equally struck by the essay competition, where the college students, there out of 4 entries, 2 were belonging to this theme. So what does it mean? The students outside are more aware of this theme. And I don't know whether students inside are not, or at least they didn't come up to a winning entry. So I thought, since we are in-house within HBNI, I thought of making this observation. So what about the future? Now, It looks to me, and as was correctly observed earlier, uh, we are talking about Atmanirbhar Bharat today. Dr. Bhabha used to talk about Atmanirbhar Bharat nearly 75 years ago. Uh, and I think in technology terms, uh, in the context of atomic energy, uh, that vision has got implemented, I would say, if not completely, but at least as far as the first stage of the power program is concerned, really completely, almost completely. So, the very purpose of HBNI, and you must give me some credit to conceptualize HBNI in those days, was to continue this Atmanirbharta uh, in a domain where we may not have models to replicate or emulate beyond the first stage, because first stage thermal reactors is a very mature technology worldwide, and we also did it within the country. So we are very proud of that happening. The second stage and third stage has strictly not matured globally. Fast reactors have made some progress. Thorium reactors have made little progress, although a lot is talked about. And the intention was that if you want to be Atmanirbhar in second stage as well as in the third stage, we need to have somewhat greater innovativeness, somewhat greater original ideas, somewhat greater sort of out-of-box ideas which nobody has worked upon. And that is what really triggered, because towards the end of my career in atomic energy, I really got worried about this mindset and this ability. And I'm glad that HBNI has, in fact, been a very successful institution, although we probably have to go miles to really achieve that vision. But I'm convinced that it is, in fact, an important instrument to realize that objective. Now, but since that time, the time when HBNI was conceived and time today, I think the demand has changed quite a bit. And it was in that context that I made that observation about the goal to realize the carbon-free world or net zero world, because see, in those days we were talking about three-stage program, and then of course we were all indoctrinated in that first stage, second stage, third stage. Today, I would say, while that remains intact, because energy requirements will keep growing even after the net zero target is achieved, energy requirements will keep growing, and you need to create more and more energy resources. And so in Indian context, thorium is destined to be important, and that has to go on. Sooner it happens, better, but it's not as if it will become irrelevant at any point of time in future. But what has become more important today is this target of net zero. So you have to realize certain minimum things before that date. And that has become an existential challenge. And this is where I many times feel that we should have done many things much, much faster than we have done. So we've done well about technology. We certainly have not done well in terms of realizing the time targets, which probably Dr. Baba had in his mind. But today, uh, in the context of net zero, that has become extremely important. Now we are today in a situation where sometimes I wonder whether the society, the people of this country, more particularly the policymakers, are even aware of the gravity of this challenge. And for example, maybe I'll repeat something which you already know, but some of you may be surprised. But uh, not many people are aware that the total energy that India would need to sustain a reasonable quality of life, uh, you cannot meet purely by renewable energy sources. And I think most of the people in the country are not aware of this in quantitative numbers. And then, of course, there may be argument that why do you require so much of energy? And so it's not my intention to get into that debate, but the notionally perceived standards of living which an average Indian would like to realize to be on par with anybody in the world or any other country in the world, you require certain amount of energy. And the hard fact is that energy in a carbon-free world cannot be delivered purely by renewable energy. You can look at all these calculations, and it's not my intention to get into it. But that is challenge number one. So on one side, you require huge quantities of nuclear energy delivered. And if some of the studies which our colleagues from IIT Bombay have done is anything to go by, that number may run of the order of 1,000 or a couple of thousand gigawatts. Now, are we prepared to deliver that energy? That's a question we should ask. So the challenge number one before all of us in atomic energy is within next 50 years, can this country deliver this quantum of energy? And this cannot happen by three-stage program, because three-stage program is a technology development program. It has its own the developmental lead time that you require. So you have to do that primarily depending on the known technologies. Now, is that a challenge something to do with research? And my strong response to that is very much so. It's not, the question is even the thing like how to find so much of money. It's not probably research in science, but it's certainly research in finance, management, societal acceptance. And I think there are some very fundamental issues that need to be addressed on the research front. So my strong suggestion going forward is HBNI should have, first of all, DAE should have in terms of the program implementation, but HBNI should have, all big universities in the world, they are at the top rank because they are multidisciplinary research universities. HBNI were talking about multidisciplinary research in the context of atomic energy program. And if this is the biggest challenge at this moment for us, I think HBNI must get into the research that is relevant to this purpose. And don't worry about how much is the science content in that, but it is required. how do you generate that money? How do you convince people? What about safety when you do the program on such a large scale? And so on and on. So, in that context, and maybe many of you will find that this is something which is quite different. But I suggest we must give a serious thought to this, because that, I think, is of crucial importance in as far as implementation in atomic. And then it's not as if there are no technology challenges. There are technology challenges because hydrogen is going to be a big part. The electricity is going to occupy a much larger share. So the question of the issues related to grid stability, issues related to production of hydrogen at the minimum cost, issues related to are there out-of-box ideas to produce hydrogen so that things become very simple. And I think it's possible. And those are, of course, areas of very high scientific importance and also scientific curiosity. So that's the second kind of level that, in my view, we must focus as far as HBNI and the research that we do in HBNI is concerned. Connected with that, there is this issue about, this changing mix of the energy components in the new transition that would take place. Now, that mix is going to impact both at the supply end as well as at the demand end. And there would be many, many technologies which, again, if you don't have a roadmap, if you don't have policy studies, then what will happen is, industry is well cued to this, and industry is well connected with their foreign counterparts. And the foreign counterparts are actually have India in their focus because India is the largest market. So if you don't have clear clarity about what is the right roadmap for India, you will end up in a kind of what I often describe as vendor-driven policy development, which will happen on, now this technology is ready, there is huge market in India, let us start deploying it. Nothing wrong with that. But in the process, if I were to just give an example, you produce hydrogen, you produce it with normal electrolytic cells, it will cost you something. You produce same hydrogen with electrolytic cells which run at higher temperature, obviously the energy cost involved would come down, it would become cheaper. You produce hydrogen without going through electrolysis and directly splitting, you avoid one step of energy conversion. It should become even cheaper, more cheap. Now, if you see in terms of technology development, the first is the most advanced, the second is following, and the third is there at a very small scale. So if you leave it to industry, obviously the priorities will get in that order, which are the areas where we'll do the market encashment today. Whereas the long-term vision will suggest that we should focus on the other one. And this is where, while both of them will end up finally the same destination, one would be, if you accelerate the research, if you bring in the later and better technologies ahead of others, there is a huge amount of saving. And in fact, the same studies show that the cost of transition obviously runs in trillions of dollars. But different strategies and the cost involved in them, that itself the difference is also in trillions of dollars. The question is, a poor country like India, can we afford? Because finally, it is the consumer who will have to pay. The business makes money and go away. Investor will invest money, make profit and go away. Finally, it is the consumer, and I think we must make sure that the consumer gets the best deal. And that is where I think research is required. And I must say, we must make haste in realizing this. The last point that I wish to make is with respect to the excellence in a university or an academic environment. Size has a very important feature. Now, what I mentioned earlier, bring in more disciplines, will obviously require enhancement of size. But at the same time, within the DAE family as a whole, in the sense that umbrella of DAE, we have HBNI, we have BRNS, we have the UGC DAE Consortium for Scientific Research, and of course we have this university in TIFR. Now, I think we must figure out a way of, I'm not saying that these institutions should be amalgamated. I'm not talking about DST solutions, Professor Balram, but talking about creating an ecosystem where while each institution pursues the programs according to its own vision, there is a level of coordination so that this in totality we become a larger ecosystem, which will actually take us higher. Even this ranking, I'm not talking about NIRF ranking, but the global ranking, I'm assuring you that if we integrate that, and you will find your ranking will go up. So I would strongly urge, let us work out a strategy to become big on this multidisciplinarity and getting institutions together, and that will make a lot of difference. And it would certainly take HBNI to significantly higher level of global recognition. So with this, I once again thank you for this opportunity to be here, opportunity to talk to you, and also implementing the Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav in a very meaningful manner. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chancellor. We are coming to the next third event of this today's function. May I now request Professor Sunil Ghose, Associate Dean, HBNI, to introduce the chief guest, Professor Padmanabhan Balaram. Professor Ghose, please. May I request all the dignitaries to occupy the seats to show a video show, followed by the introduction of the chief guest. Yes, sir. There will be. Okay. What's the slides? Just 15 minutes. Sure. So, good afternoon to all of you. So, it's an honor to introduce today's speaker, none but Professor Padmanabhan Balaraman. Professor Balaram obtained his BSc from Pune University in 1967, MSc from IIT Kanpur in 1969. And then he
obtained his PhD degree in chemistry from Carnegie Mellon University, USA in 1972. He was a research associate at Harvard University during 1972 to 1973. He served on the faculty of the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore from 1973 to 2014. He was the director of the institute from 2005 to 2014. He has contributed extensively to the areas of molecular biophysics and chemical biology. He was the editor of Current Science from 1995 to 2013, during which he authored over 300 editorials on diverse subjects related to science and scientists. He is the recipient of several awards and honors, including Padma Shri in 2002 and Padma Bhushan in 2014. He is the recipient of the R.B. Merrifield Award 2021 of the American Peptide Society. He is currently associated with the National Center for Biological Sciences, Bangalore, as the DST YOS Chair Professor. The title of his lecture is G.N. Ramachandran and the Birth of Molecular Biophysics and Structural Biology in India. Before Professor Balaram delivers his lecture, there is a slideshow on Professor G.N. Ramachandran, which is made by Dr. P.M. Aishwarya, Research Associate of HBNI. So, So now I request Professor Balaram to deliver his lecture.
Good afternoon. It's a very special privilege for me to deliver this lecture celebrating 75 years of independence in honor of Professor G.N. Ramachandran. G.N. Ramachandran, it's exactly 100 years since he was born. His date of birth is the 8th of October, 1922. So we're very close to the end of the 100th year. G.N. Ramachandran, as you've already been told, is famous for two of his most important contributions to the areas of biochemistry, structural biology. One is the structure of collagen, and the other is the famous plot that bears his name, which is called the Ramachandran plot. What I'm going to do in my lecture is to tell you a little bit about how these came about, a little bit about G.N. Ramachandran. But before I do that, I must say what my credentials are for speaking about Ramachandran. I began my scientific career in India, joining as a lecturer in his newly formed molecular biophysics unit at the Indian Institute of Science. He just started the unit in 1971. I joined the unit in 1973 as a young man, not yet 25 years old. So I saw GNR at the beginning from a distance, and then I saw him all the way until he passed away in the year 2002. In the year 2008, 2009, I happened to be the director of the Indian Institute of Science. And when I was the director, the institute turned 100. And we had to celebrate the centenary. And when you celebrate the centenary of an institution, you obviously bring out postage stamps. With a little bit of effort, I managed to persuade the Department of Posts to issue 2 stamps in honor of the institute centenary. They said yes, they would. And in one of them, they put the picture of the main building of the institute, which most of you would have seen. And the Department of Posts had no difficulty about putting a building. But then they said, we will not put an individual. So I wanted to put J.N. Tata, but they said they would not put an individual, and they issued a stamp in honor of J.N. Tata many years earlier. They said, I asked them, can I put more than one individual? They said, yes, you can put more than one individual. So then the question was, who are the individuals that we put on a stamp which honors 100 years of the Indian Institute of Science? It turned out that I chose all the individuals all on my own because the postal department came at the very last minute and there was no time whatsoever to do any kind of consultation. And here you will see a list of figures, and this is for the students. Next time you have a quiz, you can put up the stamp and see how many people you can recognize on the stamp. Some of them you will recognize, some of them you will not. It's an eclectic bunch of individuals, but they've all contributed to the century-old history of the Institute. Some are, of course, names which everybody knows about. You will recognize Homi Bhabha there on the top. And then, of course, right next to Homi Bhabha, you will see the 3 squiggles of the collagen structure of Ramachandran. And down below, just below that, is Ramachandran on the left. But we had to put a picture of a student. And probably the Indian Institute of Science's most distinguished student, of course, was G.N. Ramachandran. In the middle, of course, you can see C.V. Raman, who was not only a Nobel laureate, but although he got his work, was recognized for work done at the Indian Association for the Cultivation of Science, he spent a long time at the Institute, first as its director and later as professor of physics. Now, the paper for which Ramachandran is most famous today is this paper which appeared. It's about 3.5 pages long. It's a short paper. It's called the Stereochemistry of Polypeptide Chain Configurations. I've entitled the slide as Ramachandran and his plot. And so what you see is a two-dimensional plot, and as all plots have, there is an x-axis and a y-axis, and along these x and y-axis are two parameters, which are the torsion angles, which I will describe in a moment. For those of you who are trained in chemistry, you will find that Ramachandran uses the word configuration in the way it was used in polymer chemistry at that time. The word in organic chemistry would have been the word conformation. So today, of course, we use the word conformation far more than configuration in describing the folding of protein chains. So Ramachandran effectively studied proteins. First collagen, and later devised a method for analyzing protein structures. Now, are proteins important? Proteins are important, and there can be no better illustration of the importance of proteins than to show you the coronavirus. So if I show you the coronavirus and you look at those spiky projections on the surface of the coronavirus, they're proteins. That's the so-called spike protein, which is now known to just about everybody. You make vaccines against the spike protein. It's the spike protein which binds to the surface of the cell and takes the virus inside and causes the disease. Today, we have a three-dimensional structure of the spike protein. And there you can see this is what a protein chain would look like. It looks wonderful after computer graphics has colored the polymer chain. But you can see elements of structure in this. It is a marvel of evolutionary engineering. Proteins are soft materials, and they have been engineered over millions of years by the processes of biological evolution. Ramachandran began his career as a biophysicist when he went to Madras. When he went to Madras in 1952. And you can ask what was known about proteins in 1952 when Ramachandran went there. I show you something in 1936. And I show you this simply because today everybody talks about vaccines. Now, if you can ask what are the foundations of immunology, you will find that the foundations of immunology are in this book here. A book called The Specificity of Serological Reactions, where Karl Landsteiner actually described the origins and the characterizations of the various blood groups. And it is here that you see the seeds of immunology. Linus Pauling, one of the 20th century's greatest chemists or molecular biologists, wrote in 1936, he had a copy of Landsteiner's book, and on the side he had annotated. He said, I think the protein must contain side chains with active groups. Today, if you tell students this, they all know this because it's there in biochemistry textbooks. But this was a stage in 1936, and Pauling was about to embark on the study of proteins. X-ray crystallography, a subject which Ramachandran contributed to greatly, and I will mention this as I go along, has contributed more than any other technique in our understanding of protein structures. Proteins are complex molecules. Molecules are connected, entities of atoms connected to one another. And you can see that if you have an all-atom structure of a protein, it's like the structure which I have on the top left. Thousands of atoms all connected to one another makes no sense whatsoever. But if you take a polymer chain, strip it of all its complexities, look at just the backbone of the polymer chain and ask how does it wind around in three-dimensional space, you get a somewhat more aesthetically pleasing pictures which are called ribbon diagrams. That's how scientists visualize proteins today.
But what are those spirals and all that you see? They are what we call helices. And the helices, of course, were illustrated marvelously in a book in 1969 after Ramachandran had done his two major pieces of work. And this is an illustration by the famous illustrator Irving Guise. He actually drew this. The peptide units, which are the backbone of proteins, are planar groups of atoms. So what happens is planar groups of atoms come together, connected by a tetrahedral carbon atom, which is the carbon atom of the alpha amino acid. So a polymer chain now takes up various shapes with these planes simply tilting with respect to one another. And he picturized this in this wonderful figure that I have simply borrowed from the 1969 book. Today, if I teach a course on proteins, this is what I would do. And this is, of course, taken from many years ago. You can see it's a transparency converted into a slide. And this is just to remind myself that there was a time when we didn't have all the technology that we have today. And so you actually have to color them by hand. And that is what I have done on this slide. There are two elements of structure, the helix and the sheet, which constitute the basic modules with which all the complex structures of the thousands and thousands of proteins that you have in living cells are built up. This is what they look like. And there is a special purpose to them, because depending upon the nature of the scaffold, all the reactive atoms now, the reactive side chains of Linus Pauling of 1936, they point in different directions. They can recognize other proteins. They can be recognized by other proteins. And therefore, all of biochemistry depends on these interactions. But what did Ramachandran actually do? And I'm going to go back in time to start at the beginning. But I'm first going to tell you why he is famous and why we are celebrating him on the 75th anniversary of independence. A polypeptide chain now can be written, as I've written on the top right of the slide, as a planar collection of atoms joined by a tetrahedral carbon atom. Remember that the tetrahedral nature of the carbon atom was recognized in 1874 by Van 't Hoff and Labelle. It's one of the cornerstones of organic chemistry. It's also one of the cornerstones of biochemistry. So if you want to understand complex molecules, you have to understand simple molecules and then simply put them together. Now, of course, if you have these stuck together and they're going to take various shapes like this, then of course you can tilt about this tetrahedral carbon atom. And what Ramachandran recognized here was that for each amino acid residue, a polymer consists, a protein chain consists of many, many residues, sometimes a few hundred, sometimes a few thousands. But at each residue, there are two of these planes connected to one another, and therefore they're connected by two single bonds. And if you have a single bond in organic chemistry, of course, you can rotate about those single bonds and generate various shapes of molecules, which are what you call conformations. I'm often asked, why do you carry 4 pens in your pocket? And you would have noticed that I do have 4 pens in my pocket. I always have them. They have 4 different colors because I like to write with colors. But they're also useful to illustrate Ramachandran's idea. If I have just 2 atoms connected to one another, there's only one parameter which links them. That's the length of the bond which connects them. If I have now 3 atoms connected to one another, like H, O, and H in the water molecule, then of course I have 2 bond lengths and 1 bond angle. But now if I add another atom to it, then of course you can see I've now introduced 3-dimensionality. So what I've gone is I've gone from a plane, I've gone into the 3rd dimension. Now this can move, can be anywhere. And therefore that is now the torsion angle or the dihedral angle. The dihedral angle is, of course, the angle between the 2 planes, and therefore can be computed by simple 3-dimensional geometry. So the Ramachandran map merely asks this question, that if you have all these orientations at a residue, and this is only one angle, but you have 2 of them, so you put one along one axis and the other one along the other axis, what you now have is you have conformational space for one residue. Now, of course, if you have 1,000 residues, then of course the conformational space is correspondingly very, very large, and there are an infinite number of structures. And the question, of course, is how many of these structures are actually allowed? when you say allowed, what are the criteria that you can use for allowedness of a structure? You can say, well, atoms are like spheres. They have a certain radius, and they can't come closer than the sum of their van der Waals radii. So if you take atoms as hard spheres, you can take them as cricket balls, or you can take them as tennis balls. If you take them as cricket balls, you can't really push them beyond the sum of their van der Waals radii. Take them as tennis balls, with a little effort, you can squeeze a tennis ball just a little bit. So there's a little bit of leeway there. He asked this question, and what you see in the so-called Ramachandran plot are all the allowed regions of conformational space, which are only those which are shown with the shaded boundaries. The rest of conformational space is disallowed on van der Waals criteria. He recognized this as early as 1963, when there was, in fact, no three-dimensional structure of a protein. Three-dimensional structures were known. Perutz and Kendrew had solved the structures of myoglobin and hemoglobin, but the coordinates were not known. So this was a completely theoretical construct. He showed the Ramachandran map defines the islands of allowed structure, and most importantly, it does one thing. It transforms a three-dimensional problem into two-dimensional space, which is easy for us to think about analytically. After the Ramachandran map stood up in the years after it was published in 1963, I read you an assessment in 2011. This is done by one of the leading protein chemists in the world, George Rose. He says, no general biochemistry textbook is complete without a Phi-Psi map of the alanine dipeptide. This iconic plot is a compact representation of a profound organizing idea, one that ranks among the fundamentals of structural biochemistry. 2011, 9 years after Ramachandran died, another paper which says that the Ramachandran plot is an iconic image of modern biochemistry. This is not me saying it. These are scientists in the United States. And then they ask whether you can do something other than what Ramachandran did with these simple ideas of atoms as hard spheres. And they say we find no need to invoke additional interactions to explain the backbone conformations of proteins. And considering that proteins probably carry out most of the activities in a living cell, they are in fact fundamental to our understanding of life. But when did I get really interested in going back and looking at history? You know, when you are a faculty member on your way up, you're worried about your own work. I used Ramachandran's work a lot, but I didn't think very much about the origins of Ramachandran's work and whether Ramachandran had got the credit that he deserved or not. This is because, as far as I was concerned, he was the professor. He was the head of the department. We were all afraid of him. And we thought he'd been wonderfully recognized because to all of us, he was the most important person around. But in 2003, the US National Academy of Sciences celebrated 50 years of the Pauling alpha helix, which is one of the most fundamental advances in our understanding of protein structure. And in celebrating 50 years, they commissioned one of Pauling's students to write an essay on Pauling's work. And when I read this, this is what he said. He says, today the Ramachandran diagram is taught in all classes on protein structure and is featured in every textbook to give insights into the forces that determine the structures of proteins. But there is nothing in this diagram beyond what Pauling and Corey knew well. They built models of their proposed structures that embodied all features of the Ramachandran diagram. Apparently, they understood the principles so well that they felt no need to explain them by a diagram of this sort. And when I read this, I thought, why is an American scientist, and a well-established American scientist, a member of the US National Academy, now celebrating a Pauling anniversary, now making this extraordinarily dismissive statement about Ramachandran's work? There was then an international conference on protein structures being organized by NCBS a year later, so I thought this was the time for me to begin to prepare what I knew about the Ramachandran plot. We can ask this question: did Pauling and Corey really anticipate Ramachandran? The answer clearly is no. But I'll give you a little bit of history. If you go back into 1943, this is around the time Ramachandran was in the middle of his PhD thesis at the Indian Institute of Science. He was working in the physics department with Raman. Hydrogen bonds had just come into the literature of science, and everybody was looking at proteins, and hydrogen bonds were to dominate the structure of proteins. And Maurice Huggins, who wrote this review in 1943, he's in fact the man who first really introduced hydrogen bonds into the literature of chemistry. He did this as an undergraduate student at Berkeley in a term paper where he introduced the name hydrogen bond. Latimer and Rodebush get the credit, but actually it was Huggins who in an undergraduate term paper used the word hydrogen bond for the first time. So Huggins has structures like this. But for the benefit of the students who are here, I should show you this. In 1950, Ramachandran is going to begin his career, independent career in biophysics, starting the field of biophysics in India in 1952. In 1950, this paper appeared in the Proceedings of the Royal Society of Chemistry, which gives the structures of proteins. I show you two of them. This is the only paper that I know in which all the three authors of the paper won the Nobel Prize. Bragg had already won it, and Kendrew and Perutz would win it a few years later. But this is also the only paper that I know in the scientific literature in which every structure in the paper is wrong. And this is true. This is because they had omitted a very important feature which Pauling used a year later, which was the planarity of the peptide unit, which Pauling knew well, Kendrew knew well, Perutz knew well, Bragg knew well, but for one reason or the other, they did not use it in building their model of proteins, and therefore they did not come to the structure of the alpha helix. At that time, people who came from physics thought of the idea of helices as integral helices. There must be an integral number of residues per turn. The Pauling alpha helix is a non-integral helix, and this was not something that had been well understood at that time. Pauling, however, did not come from the direction of physics. He came from the direction of chemistry, and he used hydrogen bonds and planarity as the driving principles for his structure. This is Pauling in 1967 in Madras in Ramachandran's department with a model of the alpha helix, which had been built in the Madras department using, you can see, metal pieces for the peptide bonds and a few screws here and there to clip them together. That's Ramachandran with the triple helix. You saw this already. And this is Ramachandran looking at Quigley diagrams of Pauling's alpha helix and his own collagen triple helix just after he'd made them. So let's go back and look at Ramachandran. He came and joined the Indian Institute of Science as a young man, as was already put on one of the slides, and I suspect I am the originator of this story because I wrote this a long time ago, because I heard it from someone else. Ramachandran used to go and stand in front of the physics department at that time was in the main building of the institute because Raman had his lab there. And he didn't want to study electrical engineering, so he'd go and stand waiting for Raman to come. And Raman saw him every day, talked to him, asked him a few questions. Then he decided that Ramachandran was a very smart boy and took him into his own group as a PhD student. But Raman was, of course, a very acerbic person. He called the professor of electrical engineering and told him, look, Ramachandran is too bright to be in the electrical engineering department. This is something that never endeared Raman to his colleagues. He joined as the director of the institute in 1933 with a Nobel Prize and was removed as director of the Indian Institute of Science in 1937. He continued for the rest of his career till 1948 as professor of physics. This is why I say no director of the Indian Institute of Science should ever get a Nobel Prize, because they might then be asked to leave. Ramachandran had 3 dissertations, all of which I found in the Raman collection, and I've pictured them here. The 1944 MSc thesis, he began in optics of heterogeneous media. He moved on to the behavior of solids, and then eventually he submitted another thesis again, by now in diffraction, in 1949 for the DPhil degree of the University of Cambridge. There's a photograph that I just found in preparing for this lecture in the Raman Institute archives. I show you with an arrow, that's Ramachandran there in the mid-40s with Raman and his group. Now, I might again ask as a quiz, there's a man sitting next to Ramachandran. There are 2 stories here. There's a man sitting next to Ramachandran, and there's a lady sitting on the other side of Ramachandran. The lady was one of C.V. Raman's rare lady students. He had 2 lady students, one of them sitting next to Ramachandran and the other at the extreme right, Anna Mani and Sunanda Bai. Both of them produced big theses, and since there are lots of ladies here, I should tell them, in those days they wouldn't give PhD degrees to ladies. Both of them never got their PhDs, but their theses are lodged in the library of the Raman Institute. And the man sitting next to Ramachandran, I'll give you the answer, that's Vikram Sarabhai, up to whom you have an entire building, which I saw this morning. In 1952, on the 19th of February, 1952, Raman wrote a recommendation letter to Madras University. And this was a recommendation letter in which he recommended Raman, at the age then, at 29, was not yet 30, to become the professor of physics. Madras University did not have a physics department at that time. The university had been started in 1857, but there were no research departments of the university. So Ramachandran went to Madras to start the physics department. 11 years later, Raman nominated G.N. Ramachandran for the Nobel Prize. And this is from the Nobel archives, which are now public up to a point. So I got them off the internet by going to the archives and picking them up. Because when we say somebody was nominated for the Nobel Prize, we don't know whether they were really nominated for the Nobel Prize because of the secrecy issues which are involved. So for 50 years, nobody can see anything. So these have just been declassified and they are available. So what did Ramachandran do? He went to Madras as a young man. By this time, at the Indian Institute of Science, Raman students had already begun to move into X-ray diffraction. And the very first student to move into X-ray diffraction was G.N. Ramachandran. At the Indian Association for Cultivation of Science, which Raman had left in the early 1930s, one of the directors, Kedareshwar Banerjee, was a man who contributed enormously with the theoretical paper, which was one of the foundational papers in the use of direct methods for phase determination in crystallography. So Ramachandran came to Madras with crystallography in his mind. But it's only very recently, when I began to do some studies on Ramachandran's first PhD student and his first postdoctoral student, and probably, I believe, his best PhD student and his best postdoctoral student at any time, Gopinath Katta, with which Ramachandran really began his work at the Indian Institute of Science. They solved the first crystal structure in India, the structure of barium chloride. It's the first three-dimensional and inorganic substance. The second structure they solved was the structure of the natural product borellin, which is, in fact, the first natural product whose structure has been determined in India. It was isolated at the Indian Institute of Science in the 1930s, and its structure was solved by Ramachandran and Katta in the early 1960s. But they began to work on the structure in the early 1950s when Ramachandran was still at the Institute. So with this background in crystallography, when he went to Madras and he was asked to start a new department, he wondered what research he should do. J.D. Bernal came to Madras at that time, and Ramachandran tells the story that he asked Bernal what were the important problems. And Bernal told him that there were models for the structure of collagen, and he didn't feel comfortable with any of those models. The Central Leather Research Institute, a CSIR laboratory, was just next to the AC College buildings in which Ramachandran had begun to work. And there, the director of the Central Leather Research Institute at that time helped him, Dr. Naidama, helped him to get rat tail tendon, and later he even got him kangaroo tail tendon from Australia. Collagen, of course, is the most abundant protein in animals. In you, it's the most abundant protein. And Ramachandran produced in 1954, 2 years after he went there, the triple helical structure of collagen. And I show you the X-ray diffraction pattern on which the structure is based. Now, for those of you who have read the history of structural biology, what everybody is fascinated by is the Watson-Crick double helix. The Watson-Crick double helix is the single, there are only two images of 20th century science which will stay in everybody's mind. The first one, Dr. Kakotkar, is the atomic explosion over the New Mexico desert. The other, the mushroom cloud. The other is the Watson-Crick double helix. One exemplified the revolution in physics, the other exemplifies the revolution in biology. It's the Watson-Crick double helix was a model building exercise. What was it based on? It was based on a photograph taken by Rosalind Franklin of a DNA fiber, which looked rather like this, only that the spacings are different, and they built the model. Linus Pauling's work on the alpha helix was in fact largely a model building exercise, but he used the principles of chemistry. Max Perutz tells the story. When the Linus Pauling structure came, Max Perutz rushed to Bragg's office to tell him, look, Pauling's already published and this is the correct structure of the alpha helix. So Bragg asked him, how do you know that this is the correct structure of the alpha helix? He said, look, I immediately took the fiber X-ray diffraction pattern of keratin, which is alpha helix, and found that it has the reflection which Pauling now predicts. And therefore it's correct. Bragg asked him, why didn't you take this photograph before and come to the helix yourself? And Perutz said, I don't know, but I did it now because I was angry. And then Bragg says, I wish I'd made you angry earlier. And this is the title of an essay that Perutz wrote in later life. So there you see Ramachandran, Karta, their photograph, and their structure. Why is collagen important? It's the major component of bone, tendon, cartilage, and teeth. The most abundant mammalian protein. It has a most unusual amino acid composition. Out of the 20 genetically coded amino acids, only 3 letters are predominantly used over collagen. There are others, but we will ignore them. All you need to know now is proteins are polymers formed by linking monomeric amino acids together. There are only 3 kinds of monomers which are linked together. What are these monomers? These monomers are the smallest amino acid, glycine, and 2 amino acids which don't have a hydrogen on the nitrogen, so you can't have hydrogen bonds. So it's different from the Pauling alpha helix. Glycine, proline, and proline again. Post-translationally modified here as hydroxyproline. Now you might ask the question, if you have a repetition like this, there must be threefold symmetry in the structure. That's repeating again and again. But in that threefold symmetry, the smallest unit appears first position, fourth position, seventh position, and so on. Then you must think of a helix in which there are 3 chains. And what should be inside when they're wound around one another? The smallest amino acid, because that's all that can be incorporated inside there. Ramachandran, as I've heard him tell the story, said that the idea came to him one day when he watched his wife plait her hair the way a traditional South Indian lady does. You know, the helices winding around one another. So then comes the triple helix now, triple chain structure of collagen. No hydrogen bonds along each chain. And in fact, the chain simply coiling, and only in later years did he worry a little bit about interchain hydrogen bonds. So this then is the kind of technical picture projection diagrams which Ramachandran used in 1954 to publish the triple helical structure viewed down the axis. Today, we have a better wire model of these structures. This used to be there in our department. When Ramachandran retired, he took it and had it in his living room. Today, you will find this at the entrance to the Triple Helix Auditorium of the Central Leather Research Institute in Chennai. As far as I know, it is the only auditorium in India which has been christened after a scientific structure, the Triple Helix of collagen. So here are his papers. 1954 in Nature, 1955 in Nature, 1956 again in Nature. Short papers. If you read them, it hardly takes you 5 minutes to read them, but it'll take you significantly longer to understand what is said in the paper. There are two more papers here on collagen. Francis Crick and Alexander Rich, 1955. These papers are very important. What happened was that as soon as this Ramachandran structure of collagen appeared, Francis Crick now wrote papers in which he criticized the Ramachandran structure of collagen. He said the Ramachandran structures are wrong and put forward alternative structures. And in fact, this had a great influence on Ramachandran, because in 1954, Ramachandran would have been 32 years old. He was a man who'd been made a professor at 29. And in India, the surroundings, of course, are always watching you. And the more successful you are, the more jealous they are of you. And therefore, the surroundings had a remarkable effect on him. And this was, I think, to scar his mental outlook in the years to come. Ramachandran sent his structure to Pauling. And Pauling, of course, said, I've read it with great interest, because Pauling was also working on the structure of collagen. See, Pauling, Crick were working on the structure of DNA, and they immediately began to work on the structure of collagen once DNA had been determined. And he said, Pauling, of course, says some aspects of your structure are unsatisfactory. This is what the physics department in Madras looked like in 1955. You know, things have changed. Everybody is colorful nowadays. At that time, everybody was in white. When we celebrate Azadi ka Amrut Mahotsav, we might also reflect a little bit on how India has changed over the years. In fact, when Dr. Kakotkar talked about energy requirements for the future, for all kinds of energies, he was talking about the future. But when I'm asked to talk about Ramachandran, I'm talking about the past. So sometimes it might be worthwhile also to reflect on what there was in the past. So you can see Gopinath Katta there. We're still in the traditional Malayali attire, sitting right next to Ramachandran. These are letters which have come from the archives now, which we've found. And these are letters written by Alex Rich and Francis Crick. This letter is dated 1st November 1955, when the collagen controversy was at its height. And then he says, we're holding a seminar here, etc. He knows that Ramachandran cannot go. He said, perhaps you would prefer Dr. Katta to come to present the work. I found these letters of Katta to Ramachandran, given to me by a colleague who located them in Madras University. And this is what Katta had to say. He said, Francis Crick was telling me, I do not know what he meant. The general idea seems to be that the publication of our paper was purposely delayed by months for them. This is Randall at King's College, London, to work up our idea of after seeing the manuscript. So if you go back and read Watson's Double Helix, anybody can read it. There are competing groups there. There's a group at King's College, London, there's the group at Cambridge, and there's Pauling at Caltech. The same characters appear in the drama of collagen. Katta worried about the structure, looking at the criticism. He says, I'm worried about this, I'm worried about bad contacts. And when you hear the term bad contacts, what he means is contact between atoms which are coming too close to one another. This is when Ramachandran began to ask the question, how close can atoms come to one another? They can come as close as the van der Waals distance. But what is the van der Waals distance? You know, physicists sometimes have van der Waals distances, but the physicists' van der Waals distances can be unrealistic. Very often, they are not based on the kind of experiments that you do in chemistry and biochemistry. So what Ramachandran then did really was to set out to ask, what are these contact limits between atoms? Before I come to that, a few words on collagen. Ramachandran says, in his own articles, he says about the helix era. He says, in 51, the alpha helix, in 53, the Watson-Crick double helix, and in 54, the collagen triple helix. I never got the opportunity because even before he died, I was still afraid of him. I saw him on many days, but I never could bring myself to ask the question, did you ever see the Watson-Crick double helix paper in the 1950s? My suspicion is he did not, because it would take a long time for the journal to arrive in India at that time. Ramachandran explains what he did, but I won't go into that. But these are the three structures here. The helix, and these are the three helices of biochemistry. The single helix, the double helix, and the triple helix. Pauling came to Madras in 1967 and said this. He says that in 1953, he proposed a structure for collagen. It turned out that it was wrong. And he proposed it in a lecture he gave in Stockholm in 1953. But he at that time said that he and Corey should be allowed 2 guesses on collagen and stated that we were determined that our second guess would be right. But then before he'd made his second guess, Ramachandran and Katta had published the triple helix. This is what he says in his presidential address in the 1967 Madras Conference. Francis Crick, in his autobiography, wrote on DNA and collagen. And then he says, at the very end, I won't read all of this, he said the characters were as colorful and diverse as the characters in the double helix story. He's not quite true. Ramachandran at that time was not known. He was in faraway Madras, and nobody worried about him. The facts were just as confused and false solutions just as misleading. Competition and friendliness also played a part in the story. I don't believe there was any competition because Ramachandran was working in isolation in the AC college buildings in Madras University. And he says, nobody's written even one book about the race for the triple helix. And he says this is surely because in a very real sense, collagen is not as important a molecule as DNA. Maybe so, but collagen is a very important molecule even today. It's very important in disease. People who have mutations of collagen, where glycine, the key glycine is replaced by alanine, have various kinds of genetic disease. Rich goes on to say, in 1955, after we got interested in the molecule, we found ourselves saying, do you realize that 1/3 of all the protein in your body is collagen? So there are many ways of presenting a story, and today, of course, everybody knows how to present a story very well. With all this controversy, with what we know in the years that have passed, is the Ramachandran-Katta structure truly the correct structure of collagen? Turns out it is. And there's now a crystal structure of a fairly long peptidic model of collagen done by single crystal X-ray diffraction, and it matches the collagen, the Ramachandran-Katta model very well, which he calls here the triple standard 7-2 helix, does not correspond to the Rich-Crick model. But by this time, Ramachandran was worried about the contacts between atoms because Crick had said, your collagen structure is wrong because atoms come closer than the sum of their van der Waals radii. Crick in Cambridge could say that, but nobody knew what the sum of the van der Waals radii for real atoms are. So what Ramachandran and his group did in Madras was to look at all the crystal structures which were available then. But very few crystal structures were available in the early 1960s because the direct methods of crystal structure determination still lay in the future. Work of Karl and Hopman, many years in the future. And therefore, there were very few structures. Many structures were two-dimensional structures, very few three-dimensional structures. They took all of these and analyzed the structures to see how close atoms come together because molecules are packed in the crystal and they're close packed in the crystal. By averaging those distances, you get what are called non-bounded contact distances. Now, you might ask the question, is it easy to take three-dimensional coordinates and now measure the distance? The answer is no. There were no computers at that time. Ramachandran had no access to a computer in the early 1960s. So you had to do every calculation only by hand. You would do them with Clark's tables, and I'll come to that in a moment, and then with a mechanical calculator which had become available. So this is how the Ramachandran plot evolved in the period between 1960 and 1963, and eventually appeared in this form. It looks slightly different because afterwards there was a commission on biochemical nomenclature which simply changed the signs of all the dihedral angles. Instead of going from 0 to 360, they made it from 0 to minus 180 and 0 to plus 180 so that it looks a little better and fits with organic chemical conventions. So this is from the famous Ramachandran, Ramakrishnan and Shashishekaran paper of 1963. I show you a picture here of Ramachandran's PhD student, C. Ramakrishnan, who was my long-term colleague at the Indian Institute of Science and passed away 2019. And this is the calculator that he used. And it is based on this that calculating for every 10 degrees these dihedral angles. It's a fairly involved calculation to take 4 atomic coordinates and calculate the dihedral angle. Even as an assignment, you won't do it today because there are programs which will do these calculations for you. So, and this wasn't a very complex calculator. Many years later, this is I learned everything that I know about dihedral angles from Ramachandran's lectures and from Ramakrishnan, who was a friend, so I could ask him more silly questions. And long after retirement at the Indian Institute, he was teaching students at IISER Pune to calculate dihedral angles by hand, which is a very worthwhile exercise, and you can see the kind of computations which might be involved. But if you go back and look at the original and the famous Ramachandran paper in the Journal of Molecular Biology, I reprinted this paper in Current Science many years ago in celebrating an anniversary. And when I did this and I was looking at it with my editor's eye, I found that the famous Ramachandran plot had the wrong legend. So what had happened in the original paper was the legends of figures 2 and 3 had been interchanged, but nobody had ever pointed this out in the literature. So I immediately asked my friend Ramakrishnan, can I correct it? And then he said, no, you can't correct it because professor will be angry and he's still there. So we left it as it is, and we never dared to correct it. When did the plot acquire the name of Ramachandran? It appeared in the book by Dickerson and Geiss, and Dickerson was the man who really christened it as a Ramachandran map. And so in his book, he called this the Ramachandran plot. Afterwards, it's called a Ramachandran map, and there it is in all its glory. Around the same time, 1965, this is a 1965 lecture of David Phillips after he'd solved the first protein structure of first structure of an enzyme, lysozyme at that time. And here he is, talking at the Royal Institution. So it should gladden your hearts in the 75th anniversary of our independence. There was work of this magnitude actually going on, somewhat unknown, unsung, and unrecognized by the surroundings in Madras University. And David Phillips illustrates the length of polypeptide chain by making that model, which goes 32 feet long and goes to the ceiling of the Royal Institution. Then he shows how it's folded into the globule, and you can see the globule there in the corner. That's the globular protein structure. Now, to give some idea of Ramachandran, in 1968, he wrote a very famous review in Advances in Protein Chemistry. He was invited by John Edsall, one of the most outstanding editors of the scientific journals of all time. Edsall knew what was important, so he invited him to write a review. This is a comprehensive review. A comprehensive review which says anything about the field which is known at that time in 1968. Many years later, in 1988, I was at the University of California in San Francisco, and in their library, I found this volume of Advances in Protein Chemistry and took it out and found that the most marked chapter was the Ramachandran chapter. And there was a graduate student who came up and asked me, he came to ask me some questions, and he came up and asked me, this is called a Ramachandran map. Is Ramachandran a noun or is Ramachandran an adjective? And then I had to tell him the story about who Ramachandran really was. And now in the centenary, I find that I still continue to do the same thing. I've only kept the editor's footnote. He says, by the author's request, the publishers have left certain matters of usage and spelling in the form in which they wrote them, which means that you can't correct anything that he writes, whoever you are. And so even in this rather prestigious review, everything appeared as he wrote it. So the Ramachandran map has evolved over the years. Now it's there in color. I'll come back to my original question. Did Pauling know what Ramachandran did? And the answer is no, because in this article which appeared in 2001, one of Pauling's postdoctoral fellows, later probably one of the most distinguished crystallographers of the 20th century, Jack Dunitz, wrote this article on Pauling's left-handed helix. Every structure which Pauling gave was for polyglycine. Pauling, as a great scientist, intuitively recognized where he might get into trouble. So he avoided the problem of helix sense and configuration by choosing the only amino acid which is achiral. And therefore, it doesn't matter whether it is left-handed or right-handed. The coordinates are still correct. In fact, every one of the coordinate sets that he's given is for left-handed helices. The moment you put another substituent and make the amino acid chiral, then of course only one hand of the helix will be allowed. That comes out if you look at the Ramachandran map immediately, where I've superposed the Ramachandran maps of L-alanine and D-alanine, and they will be mirror images of, they'll be inverted over the center, and you can see that this kind of inversion is necessary. You have to go from right to left. Today, the Ramachandran map is used to correct models or to validate protein structure models. Some years ago, a lot of models used to be wrong. If you plot the Ramachandran angles, you'll get scatter all over. If you get the structure correctly, all the Ramachandran angles will cluster in the allowed regions of Ramachandran space. So today, when I produced this issue of Current Science in 1990, I got many of the famous crystallographers of the world to write, and they did write these articles on how Ramachandran maps are used in structural biology, and structural biology has become more and more important. Today, of course, it is the most important tool for analyzing protein structures, and for those who can think in convert three-dimensional objects into two-dimensional space. It's a wonderful analytical tool. You don't have to really have a computer screen in front of you. Ramachandran map after 50 years can be made more attractive. I got a student to do the map on the right, so it can tell you the populations of amino acids which have occurred in the allowed regions. The plot on the left is what I would call an experimental Ramachandran map, which has been taken from all the residues in the protein database, over 4 lakh points at this point, and you can see the contours of the Ramachandran map simply appear. So a theoretical construct has been completely validated experimentally in all these years. Today, even a beginning PhD student asks me about impact factors and citations. There's nothing that demonstrates the corruption of science more than these endless and absolute mania for impact factors and citations. But I thought I must show you something about citation statistics of the Ramachandran map. They're well cited. But Garfield did not introduce citation indices with the idea of saying, do I have more citations than my neighbor? That was not the purpose. What he did was he thought it would be a way of connecting scientific ideas to one another and look at the evolution of science, the sociology of science. How is one idea connected to another? Set of papers which have the same kind of references are homologous to one another. just like proteins which have the same kind of sequence are homologous to one another. So today you can do all of this because the Web of Science is available. So I got a librarian, an information scientist at the Jindal University whom I know, to draw for me these historiographs. And so I wanted to know what are the areas where the Ramachandran papers are cited. The 1963 paper is cited 2,500 odd times. But look at other papers which cite them. They're cited even more. Why are they cited even more? Because they've led to a new field. What are those fields? Secondary structure prediction of proteins. Yesterday in my talk in ACTRAC, I mentioned this. Everybody is talking about three-dimensional structure prediction using artificial intelligence and machine learning. But in the 1970s, everybody was talking about secondary structure prediction. And that's the famous paper of Chow and Fussman. Then molecular dynamics, which appears in the 1980s. To analyze molecular dynamics trajectories, you need the Ramachandran angles. That's how trajectories are found over time. And of course, validation of crystal structures. You might ask, why are there more crystal structures today? Largely because of synchrotron radiation, largely because of more powerful X-ray sources, advances in computation. So many fields of molecular and structural biology have been revolutionized over time by technology. But it turns out that at the heart of analysis lies the Ramachandran map. How was Ramachandran recognized? Every time in India, we are fond of introducing people with all the honors that they have received. One is sometimes embarrassed by them. But one is even more embarrassed by the fact that a man like Ramachandran was not recognized by the government of India, and he died in 2002. He was not recognized by the government of India with any of the Republic Day honors which everybody seems to treasure so much. How was he treated? So I looked again with Google and the internet, and here I found that the last reference that I find to Ramachandran from Indian sources is a notice which was sent to him by the Income Tax Department. And in 1978, just when he was retiring from the molecular biophysics unit where I spent my entire scientific career, he went as Fogarty Fellow to the National Institutes of Health. In those days, the amount of money that you would get as Fogarty Fellow at the National Institute of Health could not have been more than a couple of $1,000s per month. Of course, it was significantly more than what we were getting here, but it doesn't matter. And then he says, this is the case, that he received a stipend of $10,000 and $25,000 in the calendar. He's reported it, and they've made an assessment. Ramachandran, of course, has protested the assessment, saying, you're taking away my money. The case has gone on for a long time, and in 1982, fortunately, the case was decided in Ramachandran's favor. And they said that what he received was in the nature of salary, but in the nature of scholarship. The word scholarship has two meanings. One is the scholarship that you receive. The other is the scholarship that you show. Ramachandran showed us an extraordinary degree of scholarship. To Madras in 1963 and 1967, everybody who was anybody, and everybody who was going to become somebody in the field appeared for the 63 and 67 conferences. They appeared because they recognized that this was then probably one of the most important centers for the discipline in the entire world. This is a picture taken, you've already seen a part of it, picture taken with Dorothy Hodgkin at that time on the left, and Linus Pauling, two both Nobel laureates, and both, of course, two of the immortal figures of 20th century science. I end with a set of photographs. This is Ramachandran in 1951 in Bangalore as a young faculty member before he set out for Madras. There's Ramachandran in the center of the photograph in 1967 in Madras, and you can see that's the time when Pauling came. And the one interesting thing that I found, which is slightly different from students in those days compared to students today, is in those days students seemed to look away from the camera, and nowadays all the students look at the camera because they're all used to selfies and so on, so they all look and smile at the camera. But in those days everybody seemed to be shy and they were looking somewhere else. 1974 in Bangalore, I am also a part of this photograph in the top row on the right-hand side, the second from the left, and Ramachandran, of course, in the center. And of course, on the bottom right is Ramachandran in the 1990s. He died in 2002. Before that, he was in Madras. He died in Chennai. Before that, he had moved to Ahmedabad. After his wife died, he moved to Chennai, and he spent his last years in a sort of geriatric care unit. Those of you who are interested in looking at a more elaborate and assessment of Ramachandran by many other people should look at this documentary produced by ISA Pune, by students at ISA Pune, called The Trials and Triumphs of G.N. Ramachandran. You will notice that these references have been made to anomalous dispersion, to his work on two-dimensional image reconstruction. Two-dimensional image reconstruction is one famous paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy, but he didn't proceed further with that. Part of the reason for Ramachandran's non-recognition at the highest levels is the environment in which he worked. If your own environment does not recognize you and value you highly, it is unlikely that an environment outside the country is going to value you very highly. So I think we must introspect in the 75th year of independence at what has happened to scientists in the past, and of course also worry about what might happen to scientists in the future. Thank you very much. I might add only one personal note in concluding this lecture, which is, I think, a word of atonement. In 1973, I applied for a position at the Indian Institute of Science, and I was selected as a lecturer in Ramachandran's newly formed biophysics department. So in May of 1973, I got the appointment letter. But before I got the appointment letter, Ramachandran wrote me a letter saying, I'm coming to Chicago, come and see me. Now, I went all the way from Boston to Chicago, which for a sort of relatively poor postdoctoral fellow was a lot of money to travel in those days. I think I didn't even go by flight. I went by Greyhound bus. I reached Chicago, and I met him. He had one postdoc, an Indian, whom he had with him for a long time, and I met his postdoctoral fellow. He said, yes, you can now go in and see the professor. I went in. And first question was, he didn't ask me anything. He asked me, do you know anything about the structure of collagen? And I said, I don't, because I didn't know anything about the structure of collagen. And I was trained in America to give an honest answer as a student. If I didn't know, I said, I didn't know. He didn't say anything else. He just kept quiet. And after about 10 or 15 minutes of total silence, he said, let's go for lunch. So we got up and we went out. We picked up the other postdoctoral fellow, and the three of us trooped off to the cafeteria. We went to the cafeteria, we had our lunch in silence, and then we finished our lunch and he got up. And I asked him, is there anything else? He said, no, you can go. I went away again. Later that year, 6 months later, I arrived in Bangalore and went to report to him. I went to report to him that I've joined as a lecturer. The first question he asked me was, he didn't ask me how you are, what are you doing, how are you staying? He asked me, do you think you can use the nuclear overhauser effect to determine whether collagen has a one-bonded structure or a two-bonded structure with inserted water molecules? Now, I knew about the nuclear overhauser effect because I had been trained, but I knew also that there was no NMR spectrometer worth its salt at the Indian Institute of Science, so the experiments were impossible. And also the collagen problem was an intractable problem at that time. So I again said, no, I don't know anything. And he said, all right, you can go. But he didn't say anything beyond that. So to some extent, in the years that have followed, I've learned what he did. I've learned to appreciate what he did. And I've then learned to communicate it to other people. And I think in so doing, I've really atoned for my ignorance of the 1970s. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. May I ask the dignitaries to occupy the dais? Sir. Yes. We request our Chancellor, Anil Kakotkar, to present a memento to Professor Balaram as a token of our love and appreciation for his lecture. Relax. We now request our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor P. R. Vasudeva Rao, to present the memento to our Chancellor, Anil Kakotkar. So we're coming to the last session, the formal vote of thanks. So on behalf of HBNI family, it's my pleasure to propose vote of thanks on this occasion. It gives me immense pleasure to deliver vote of thanks for this event, for all the dignitaries assembled here. My heart fills with a lot of gratitude and respect for our distinguished guest, our Chancellor, Professor Anil Kakotkar, for not only sparing invaluable time for us to grace this occasion, but also enlightening us with this commendable talk. Sir, you have indeed put best of your efforts to make this event an unforgettable one. And your points about target of net zero and challenging of energy crisis and coordinating all the events to make HBN at the next level is well taken into account. Hope we will work towards betterment in the coming years. I thank our chairman, DAE Sri K.N. Vyas, for supporting and encouraging in all our activities in bringing HBNI to the next level. His vision towards making HBNI the global standard is the secret of our energy. So on behalf of his absence, I thank him. So on behalf of HBNI, I extend a really hearty vote of thanks to our chief guest, Professor Padmanabhan Balaram, the Padma Bhushan Awardee and former Director of Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, for delivering an excellent and mind-blowing talk on G.N. Ramachandran and the birth of molecular biophysics and structural biology in India. The session is simply elegant and highly informative. And if you go through some of the articles of Professor Balaraman, he used to say, how to take science? Science is driven by curiosity. And the only way to do good science is to be curious and to do what you like and to, despite what any else around you thinks about it. So this is also very important for science, and is simply reflecting the idea of Albert Einstein, where he said that I have no special talent. I am only passionately curious. So almost equal to the great scientist, he has given all his informations in his editorial pictures. And about this younger generation, he used to always worry about this one. Today's generation is much better informed, and there is no excuse for them not to be informed because of all the technologies that are available. They should be able to make up their minds. This is a great message for the young scientists. Thank you, sir, for your mind-blowing talk. I thank Professor Prasanna from ACTREC for your presence. I thank Professor R.B. Grover, Professor Joshi for their presence here. I thank Professor A.P. Tiwari for his presence. I thank all the professors and associate deans of HBNI for their presence here. I thank Dr. Anju Singhal, Assistant Dean, for making an excellent effort in bringing the results of this essay and poster competition. I think there are so many people are here. Professor Saibal Basu, Professor Venkatramani, Professor Deep Kumar, Professor Hema Malini, Srimati Asha Sharma, Srimati P.P. Varghese, Sri Joseph, Sri Sunil Kanti Sharma, Srimati Anil Angita Patel for supporting her. And an event like this cannot happen overnight. The wheels started rolling a month ago. We have been fortunate enough to be backed by a team of very proactive and dedicated staff of our HBNA family, who are all used in their job. I am short of words for their involvement and their willingness to take on the competition of talks beyond their comfort zones. Thank you all. I'm thankful to the HRD members and friends for their excellent support. I submit my humble thanks to Sri Sadanand of Training School Hostel and his team of members for providing adequate facility and excellent hospitality for our guests and also for all the excellent support for making this event highly successful. So I submit my special thanks to Professor Sunil Ghosh, Associate in HBNI. Being the coordinator of this event, Professor Ghosh made excellent arrangement for making this event highly successful. I also want to thank people who worked behind the scenes, Mr. Anurag and Rishabh, for their contribution in making this event a resounding success. Once again, I thank you all for your attention. Respected Chancellor, beloved Chairman, members of Academic Council, Council of Management, Board of Studies, Dean Academics, and student affairs from various constituent institutions, directors of constituent institutions, who are all taking part in this event through online as well as offline platforms. So, ladies and gentlemen, faculty members, and especially students of HBNI, once again, I would like to thank that we are most grateful to you all. Before I conclude this vote of thanks, I want to present you an inspirational quote by Albert Einstein. Our greatest weakness lies in giving up. Never stop trying. Never stop believing. Never give up on what you really want to do. The person with big dreams is more powerful than one with all the facts. Thank you all. Jai Hind. So on behalf of HBNI, we thank you all once again, and please join us for a high tea which is arranged in the first floor. Okay, now, out to the national anthem.
जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे